Good morning, dearest friends. Welcome. Today is the 20th of Tammuz, July 19th. It's Tuesday, and we're here to study the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. And today we are studying Maseches Shabbos. And for the first day, we can launch our morning by declaring that we are now studying Perek Chai, the 18th chapter of Maseches Shabbos. Big milestone, a special number, a special day, and the Yasher Koyach to all the special folks here who make this happen. And notwithstanding all the drama of our personal, communal, and global life, the Talmud Chabura plugs in every day, and it's a beautiful tribute to the devotion, to the love of Torah, of Yiddishkeit and community. And so Yasher Koyach, and of course, a new chapter. Let's dedicate it for the well-being of the dear members of our Chabura and their households. They should have health and happiness and koyach and all of their heart's desires. Kol mishalois libchem letoiva. Everything that our hearts desire for the good should be fulfilled on this very special and auspicious day. We started reading the Mishnah. We'll start over. And the gist of our discussion today is, well, the Mishnah anyways, talks about the license to move certain items or remove certain items on Shabbos, and what would be the problem with removing them. So if we read the Rishonim, there are a variety of nuanced explanations, and although I didn't intend to do so, why don't I read just the sampling of that now, and then we can jump back into it. So Rashi explains, Rashi explains that the issue at hand is Tircha de Shabbos, strenuous labor on Shabbos. It's on Shabbosdik to use strain, even though it's not one of the melachos, as we discussed yesterday. So that's why I'm referencing yesterday's discussion. You're not allowed to do tircha. If it's not a mitzvah, one cannot subject themselves to extra tircha. Although there is no melacha to carry boxes around the house or to dance around the room with the couch on your shoulders, but short of a mitzvah, that would not be an appropriate Shabbos behavior. The Ritva explains that the issue here is not an explicit isser. I'm sorry. The issue here would be uvdin dechol, alongside tircha isser. So it uses the word uvdin dechol. In today's common language, you'll hear the phrase uvdin dechol, which means mundane weekday-like activities. Tosfos later is going to clarify that probably a person should not be prohibited from uvdin dechol in your house. So we'll take a look at Tosfos. But the general gist, the general vibe is, of course, these are rabbinic. This would be a rabbinic restriction that the Chazal did not deploy in the case of a mitzvah, and therefore our Mishnah is going to go through a series of items that can be moved for the purpose of the mitzvah, and some items that cannot be moved for the purpose of the mitzvah. We'll allow the Mishnah to fill in some more of the details. As this is a new chapter, I'd like to have on standby Rabbi Steinsaltz as well, who always is a great resource. A great resource for, in addition to the Gemara. All right, let's dive right in. Let's share the screen. We'll dive right in. So again, I'm going to do a fast recap of our Mishnah for the fullness of the record. And then we'll jump into the Gemara. Any questions or comments as we introduce a wonderful new chapter to our portfolio of Talmud studied together? Feel free. I did hit mute all at the beginning of the class, but I welcome any questions or comments now and throughout our discussion. That's what makes this wonderful. That's what makes this interesting. And that's what makes this such a special and insightful discussion. Any
I don't know why you have to refer
tell you, Rabbi, you don't realize how special you are. Maybe lucky for us, because you would start charging us. I'm on another chabrusa. Somebody asks a question, they consider it a disturbance.
Doctor?
So we shouldn't carry a sofa and dance with it, even in our homes, because it's a tircha, more of a physical issue.
Yes.
And you could do it during the week. How does that differentiate from the French concept of nicht Shabbosdik, where it's not a tircha to do something, but it's just an enjoyable something, which is something you could do during the week, and maybe even though you can do it, but it's not a good idea. So where's the fine line there?
So that appears to be the machlokes that we have at hand right now with some of the Rishonim. What is exactly the fine line? We know that it's not ideal to do un-Shabbosdik things, uvd and dechol. The question is on a halachic, what exactly is the halachic cutoff or distinction between something that's simply not in the spirit of Shabbos and something that Chazal actually prohibits? And so that's part of this discussion. Bli neder, as we like to do, as we study through this Gemara, we will try to pull up the halachas that are linked to it, and Be'ezer Hashem will have a little more language. It's a very important question. I would say it's a good question to keep in mind as we wet our feet and get into this Gemara. So yeah, exactly. What is the cutoff between rabbinically prohibited uvd and dechol and what is simply not in the sentiment and the spirit of Shabbos? And then, of course, when it gets down to practical bisman hazeh, there are many practical questions, because the reality is there are many things that are not technically a malacha, but you'll hear the Rosh Yeshiva or the Rebbe or the Rabbi or parents say, "Oh, it's not Shabbosdik." And so the question is, what is the halachic classification of Shabbosdik and not Shabbosdik? So, Blina, let's keep our eyes peeled. That's a very good item to have in mind. Alan, you started saying something.
I was just wondering why you have to refer to the Steinsaltz reference, because you've got 5 or 6 Talmud Chochams here.
This is a good question. That's why I don't call upon it that much. Every once in a while, something slips through, especially when it comes to foreign languages, where we have a few foreign languages represented. Every once in a while, the Steinsaltz yet contributes value to our discussion. But you're right. We have big Talmud Chachams here. So another Chabura would probably need to have it the whole time. But, and look, we have also a lot of disciplines covered from the academic world, and that too helps us a lot in our discussion. So I share it's a good question.
It's a very good question.
All right, let's get started. Yashikaya. All right, again, Mishnah. We did this yesterday. At the end of the class, we rushed through it. I wanted to be Yotzei, starting the new chapter, because you never want to end off and then not have a wet your feet in the next subject. But today, now we'll formally start the 18th chapter of Masechah Shabbos, Perek Chai, Mifanim. It's a relatively short chapter. And again, it's devoted to items that are not biblically prohibited at all. Chazal put the brakes on them. And then in the areas where Chazal places the brakes, there are waivers or permission to do mitzvah-oriented, mitzvah-related activities. Of course, there's always going to be a sprinkling of muksa mixing, because that's an essential consideration on Shabbos as well. So let's take a look. Mifanim, one is permitted to move out. Afilu arba v'chamish kupais, even 4 or 5 baskets, shelteven of grain, v'shel tvua shelteven of straw, v'shel tvua of grain, mipnei ha'archim, to facilitate, to accommodate archim, umipnei bittul beis hamedrash, or to accommodate Torah study, to mitigate bittul beis hamedrash, to mitigate the inability of folks to be involved in medrash. Abaloi esa oitzar. But one cannot an oitzar, a storehouse. This is a quite ambiguous phrase. Avaloi esa oitzar. What is it saying? You can't empty an oitzar. Is it saying you can't create an oitzar? An oitzar is a storehouse. Avaloi esa oitzar. It's a very ambiguous phrase, And Rashi actually says before you have a heart attack, which would be reasonable. Mifarish b'Gemara. Rashi says, hold your horses. The Gemara is going to explain to us what this means.
I have a question. Why does the Gemara quantify? Why does it need to quantify even 4 or 5? Why can't they just say you can empty out the storehouse? Why does it have to quantify?
So give a suggestion. Why would it
can't.
quantify?
You can't.
Because I guess there's a point where it becomes unacceptable.
So maybe there is a specific number, 4 or 5. But your question really is, if it's a specific number, choose a number. You don't say 4 or 5 and then have a 4 and 5 is not a precise number. So you're saying either choose a very specific number or don't put any number.
Or not at all.
Oh.
I mean, if it's an issue. I mean,
So this is
if
going
it's
to be
not an
Be'ezer
issue.
Hashem, the first discussion our Gemara is going to have. So the Gemara is going to hone in right away. What's this number, 4 or 5? Is it b'diuk? Are they different scenarios?
Maybe it's trying to tell you move a minimum, but if you have to, up to this level.
Yeah.
I think it's more than that. I think there might be rats under there, or there might be holes in the floor.
Hold on, Alan. And if there's a hole in the floor, what's the problem?
Somebody might fall in.
Okay, no, these are all all of the comments we're getting right now are evidence of great wisdom. And almost every comment will be referenced directly or indirectly in the coming lines of the Gemara.
But it gives you specific scenarios of when you're allowed to remove Tevin Tor. It tells you the guests or based on Midrash.
Right. So
Once you
So it
start
gives us
enumerating
mitzvah.
specific cases, then other cases may be excluded because otherwise, and it specifically excludes the outside.
Nachon. Essentially, the Mishnah is telling us that there is a license to move boxes of grain for a mitzvah, for guests or for Torah study, not for random uses. We'll find out what those other uses are. Apparently not for Eitzar. And then the Gemara further clarifies that not every item can be moved. Most items can, but there are exceptions. Now let's read Rashi. First Rashi.
But Rabbi, just
Yes, doctor.
quick, it doesn't say that you can't take out these chairs or whatever from the storeroom.
What do you mean?
When you take out something from the storeroom, okay, to give people a place to sit in the basement.
Oh, okay. No, so thank you for asking. I'm sorry to cut you off. We're not talking about chairs here. We're talking about space. It looks like people used to sit on the floor, I believe. And so these kupot are not allowing people to sit. And so by moving out the storage, you're creating a space for guests or for consumption. Yeah. So that's actually an intro. I hadn't considered that, but that's actually a very important clarification. Yeah, we're not talking about using the baskets. We're talking about the baskets getting in the way, which reminds me.
It said you can't clear a storeroom.
And it doesn't have to be to sit.
Space
It
for
can be
guests.
people come for Shabbos to go to sleep. You have guests.
Okay, let's see Rashi for a second. And again, there's a lot of ambiguity in the text of the Mishnah, which warrants a whole Gemara to discuss. So these are all very, very good and very important comments. And sometimes it's helpful to identify some of the obvious glaring questions before the Gemara addresses it, because then we'll both appreciate the Gemara's clarifications, and we'll appreciate if the Gemara asks the question in a different language. Was there a diuk in asking it differently? But for now, I just want to take a peek in Rashi for a moment. Mifanim, move it out. I don't like Rabbi Steinsaltz's translation, with all due respect. He says one may move. We're not simply talking about moving. I mean, because of the really, I would use the Art Scrolls translation here better. We may clear away. Because we're not simply talking about moving, we're talking about removing or clearing away. Let's read Rashi. Why are you allowed to clear things away? Im tzarich limkoimon. If you need the space that the kupos are taking up, lahoishiv sham orchim, to sit guests, lehasei basuda, so that they can recline and feast. Remember, I think in those days it was more likely that a person is reclining on the ground or on a special kind of couch or cushion or pillow. And also recall that when you sit in a reclining fashion, you take up much more space. Our Western mode of mealtime is a whole lot more expedient for space, because when a person is upright, you take up less space than when you're sprawled out. And so you need more space. Or you need more space for students for the drasha. And here's where Rashi gives us the clue about what the potential issue would be. Because it's a mitzvah, we are unconcerned litircha de Shabbos, for the fact that moving bushels, baskets of grain and straw is a strenuous activity, although not a malacha, certainly not in the spirit of what is Shabbos. That is Rashi. The Mishnah continues. So again, this is the first part of the Mishnah, which is the essential premise of the Mishnah. You can move a certain amount of baskets from a certain amount of scenarios for the purpose of a mitzvah. However, let me just see one thing. Give me a moment. I want to just. It was in the Erie linked. So it was mistakenly linked. Here. Sorry, one second. Very interesting. Here is the Meiri. The Meiri is a French medieval commentary in the generation or two following the Rambam, I believe. And here he's commenting on the Mishnah. And the reason why I scrolled back is I think it's a mistake. It was mistakenly linked earlier on in the Gemara. Here, so he talks about our Mishnah. He summarizes the Mishnah. Amar Harambam Pirish Mefanin. What does it mean, Mefanin? Mila Ivris Min Ponisi Habayis. It means that he cleared out. Amar Filo Arachamesh Al Derech Haribai Kilo Amar Afilo Minyan Gadol. He means to say even a lot. Ubitnai Shlo Yifana Ha'Oitzer Kula, as long as you don't empty out the entire storage space. These are things that the Gemara is going to clarify. I wanted to really show you that one line over there. Mifanin, Panisi. Yeah, the remainder of what he clarifies is all going to be in the Gemara. So we'll see it first before we read it here. All right, let's go back to the Mishnah. Actually, one more thing. I'm sorry. One more. No. All right, here we go. Abaloi, I'm sorry. Mifarin, what kind of items? Generally speaking, we said you can remove items from to make space. What kind of items? Mifanim truma tahira. You can remove truma tahira, pure truma udemai, and something which you are uncertain of its status. And so halacha gives it certain presumptions of, it presumes that certain things were separated and other things were possibly not. Rabbi Stein, we'll see the translation in a moment. My sarishain shnitl trumasai, fully processed Levite gift. My sheni v'hektish sheniftu, 10% of your produce or something that was donated to hektish that has been exchanged, and now it is available to be eaten with absolute license for consumption. V'aturmas hayavesh, beans that are a little bit bitter, because it can be used to feed your goats. So here are a series of items in our Mishnah that, although you might have thought you cannot move them because they aren't simple, straightforward food, but ultimately they're accessible, they're able to be used on Shabbos. and therefore you can move them. What is the issue? What would be an instance of something, this is Rashi, that would be acceptable? For example, Truma Tahira. Truma is the 2%. It was a little more flexible biblically, but generally speaking, it's an average of 2% that's gifted to the Kohen. Alan, you know about Truma?
Sure.
We don't collect it regretfully, Bisman Hazeh, but with Hashem's help soon. Alan, we're gonna collect some Truma. All right.
That's why I'm waiting for Mashiach.
The Chazi lebehemas Kohen, although it is a Truma, it's exclusive for a Kohen, but a Kohen can use it in their household management, including feeding their livestock. Abel Rashi points out, Truma Tmeya, if the Truma was impure, law, you cannot handle it. You know why? The afilu lebehemas Kohen lechazia, it would not even be fit to serve to a Kohen's animals. Shabbos. You could do it maybe in the weekday, but not on Shabbos. Like the Gemara in Pesachim says, Shemratz HaKoyin, Meritz Lefnei HaKela, B'Shabbos V'yom Tov Chazia Di. He be Urim and Oilam. Anyways, the long story short is the way and the nature of what a person has to do with their truma would make it off limits on Shabbos. Because it's considered beer truma tmeya, and you can't do it on Shabbos. I don't want to get into the intricacies of it. Long story short, anything that's disposing of shouldn't be done on Shabbos or Yantif. And so if the animal is unkosher, if the truma is tamei, you could possibly give it to an animal in a scenario where what you're accomplishing is disposing of it. And that's not acceptable on Shabbos. But if it's tahar, not a problem. The Gemara is going to discuss what exactly the issue here is as well. So therefore, I'm going to avoid getting into the technical halachic intricacies of why we are restricting it to items that can be handled. But suffice it to say, this is very reminiscent of a muktzah kind of conversation. The Mishnah says, you know what? You cannot transport not tevel. Tevel is grain which you know with certainty it has not been halachically prepared. No gifts to the Kohen, no gifts to the Levi. Our group here, we have a nice representation of Kohanim, Leviim, and Yisraelim. So we always, our antennas perk up when we hear about the Meiser. Not giving Meiser to the Kohen and the Levi, this is no good. Okay. So on Shabbos, you cannot handle, you cannot move, you cannot remove untithed, unprepped grain, nor Levite gifts, tithes that's been gifted to the Levi, but the Levi has not given a share to the Kohen. Nor may you handle grain that was set apart with the intention of bringing it up to Yerushalayim, and it has not yet been exchanged. So this is the very grain that you need to bring to the Beis Hamikdash or Jerusalem. V'loy as haluf, nor may one transport luf. What's wrong with luf? It's an incredibly bitter item.
Onion. It's an onion.
No, where does it say onion? Here he translates it as arum. Actually, Alan, it's good you're on. What's arum or arum?
That's a flower, I think.
Arum lilies, a genus of flowering plants native to Europe, Northern Africa, Western and Central Asia. And are arum plants poisonous?
Yes.
Well, not exactly, but it causes irritation. Oh, eating any part of the plant can be fatal. So why would people harvest and hold on to arum?
Rabbi,
If you
Yes.
don't like your wife.
Alan, we'll pretend we didn't hear that.
Rabbi, why are we off on this tangent? I mean, if you think of it practically, they want to move something within a certain area to be able to teach or to whatever you're allowed to do. So you have 3 or 4 baskets. You're supposed to figure out what kind of basket, whatever. You're moving it, a couple of feet. What
Okay.
difference does it make where it is?
It's not a difference
not
of
eating
where it
it.
is. It's a difference of what is in those crates. What are in those baskets?
Why would it matter if you move them 3 feet to the left or to the right?
I don't know if this is talking about moving it 3 feet. I think it's moving it out of.
Well, we're talking about moving it entirely out, but even if you're moving it a little distance, if they are totally muktzah, then you can't handle them at all. Alan, can I ask you a question? Where
No,
did
but
you
look,
get
look at the Mishnah. The Mishnah just says grain or wheat or whatever the Mishnah
grain
says.
or wheat? That's regular grain or wheat you can carry. But odd products that are prohibited from being handled or have very restrictive uses or are not edible at all or are lacking a major processing stage that will
Okay,
make
so-
them edible,
Yeah.
well, then you can't handle them.
So,
Now,
Rabbi,
Alan,
what's
sorry, go ahead.
happening? What's happening here? The Mishnah says you could do something, and now the Gemara is reducing what you can do in a
the
sense.
Mishnah is qualifying its original statement.
It's usually the other way around.
This is Mishnah. Here, let me show you again. It's a long Mishnah.
5 baskets, finished produce.
No, first he gives a general statement. Generally speaking, here's how you understand this Mishnah. Generally speaking, you should not be busy moving baskets and bushels of grain on Shabbos. Period. Notwithstanding the fact that generally it's a tircha, it's not Shabbosdik, no matter exactly how you want to describe it, there is a license to do so if it's for the purpose of creating space for guests or a space for the lecture. What do we mean that you're allowed to move stuff? Well, that's regular grain that's accessible or handleable on Shabbos. For example, even truma and demai, etc., etc. You know what can't be moved? Even under these special mitzvah scenarios, items that are entirely not usable, inaccessible, and muksa on Shabbos. What might that include? Any kind of grain you can't eat today, or you can't feed to your animal today. Why can't you? Maybe because it's got a halachic.
But Rabbi, that's the same thing vochadik. If you don't know
No.
what this grain is, you can't do anything with it. I don't care
No.
Shabbos or not Shabbos.
No, certain grain is free and clear. There's no alarm on it. There's no restraining.
Yeah, but how do you know?
Believe me, when you're a farmer, you know what's in your baskets.
No, but this is not the farmers. These are the yeshiva boys.
No, talking about an owner, a person that has a bunch of grain. And hold on, Beryl, maybe someone else in the Chabura can explain this better. Maybe I'm not properly explaining something. Am I missing something? Professor, you're muted.
I think you explained it well. There are limitations what you can do with tevel, Shabbos or no Shabbos. And as a result, it gets special treatment on Shabbos. That is, you cannot eat it until you separate what has to be separated. And you cannot move it because it is before you separated what has to be separated from the table. That is, here the difference of handling during Shabbos stems from the difference in handling in weekdays as well, because the status of tevel is different from truma. And yes, indeed, the farmer knows very well what is in those baskets, because eventually the farmer is going to separate truma and make this tevel usable. End of story.
Beryl, was that helpful?
Yeah, I guess my problem is that I didn't see it as the farmer moving the stuff. I
It
figured
doesn't matter who it is. The Mishnah is not very interested in identity. You could be a guy who buys closeouts and happens to have a closeout of baskets. We don't really care about the identity of the individual. We care about the produce and a person's ability to use it on Shabbos or to handle it on Shabbos.
If you are an yeshiva boy and you are going to move produce, you have to ask the farmer what is inside, because inadvertently you can move tevel.
But Beryl, I want to add one more thing. There's a discussion elsewhere in the Mishnah, I believe, that if you find a random basket with a letter on it, there was a code system. If something was truma, meiser, untithed, And so it's quite possible that these baskets have labels on them.
Yeah,
And so-
I guess, Rabbi, my problem is, why is the kind of stuff moving even a factor? Are we not just talking about moving? Maybe that's a better way to put my problem.
No.
When you say moving, you mean muksa?
No, there's certain things, Roberto,
Yeah,
certain things that you're allowed to move. So it's not just a question of the moving. Let's assume you can move. But within the concept of moving, there's a subdivision, certain things you're allowed to move and certain things you're not allowed to move. And that is what we're discussing here.
yeah, but I don't understand why what's in the basket becomes a factor in moving. Anyway,
Because
okay.
if you cannot use it on Shabbos, then you cannot move it on Shabbos.
It's muksa.
Only the foods that you can use on Shabbos, the grain that you can use on Shabbos, you're allowed to move on Shabbos.
Okay,
Barrel.
okay.
Um,
Go ahead, move it.
now, hold on. Now,
Don't-
before we
don't listen
continue,
to me.
now I want to read Rabbi Steinsaltz on Arum. But first, I want to ask Alan. Alan, how did you know, or why did you suppose to say that Arum is an onion?
No, I said the loaf was an onion
I'm sorry, luf. Why did you say that luf was an onion?
because I read this part. I read this before
Where'd you read it?
in shul
Where? Which book?
in the number 4 of Shabbos.
So was it Art Scroll or Steinsaltz?
It was art school.
Ah, okay. That's what I was wondering. Because Rabbi Steinsaltz does not translate, at least not his initial translation. He does not say that Arum is, I'm sorry, that luf is an onion. But you're
I'm
right.
gonna
Art
Google
Scroll
it.
says,
By the way, today, if you say Lufton Israeli, it means spam.
luf means what?
and Spam, S-P-A-M.
Really?
Yeah, in the army, we ate loof. It was kosher. It wasn't a pork product.
Oh,
It was a
spam.
kosher. It was a kosher meat product, but we had it in the army in cans, and it was called loof. It was pretty good, as
It
a matter of
probably
fact.
tasted just as good.
It was
Rabbi
pretty
Nachman, it was
good.
probably a
It-
take on this toxic poisonous.
It was pretty good.
Oh, interesting. All right, so I want to just take another moment. So, Rabbi Allen, it's good that you did that research. So the Hebrew word here is luf. Rabbi Steinsaltz translates it as arum, which is this plant. Art Scroll tells us that either it's a bitter, inedible legume that when it's raw, it's really not usable, but maybe it could be cooked. The Rambam describes it as an onion, which is what Reb Allen, our Kohen, is referring to. Now I just want to read one more thing.
Rashi also explained that is a legume. That's
In
not,
Kitniot.
yeah.
So Rashi doesn't agree with the Rambam that it's an onion, but I want to read for you in the Steinsaltz Gemara. The plant is generally identified as arum of Eretz Yisrael, which is Arum palestinium. The plant has a bulb in the ground from which large leaves sprout. The arum inflorescence has a unique structure. It's covered with a special kind of leaf called it whatever. All parts of the plant contain calcium oxalate, pharmacists, good or bad to eat calcium oxalate?
I don't,
No idea.
calcium, okay. Oxalate, I don't know.
Oxalate causes kidney stones, and I don't think it's good for you.
Well, Rabbi Steinsaltz continues.
Especially if
and
you have
says-
Calcium
calcium.
oxalate is basically would be the same thing. It would cause kidney stones, and
Yeah.
I don't think it would be advised.
Especially with the calcium, you have
Well,
rocks.
The Steinsaltz note continues and says it is poisonous and causes extreme itchiness to any skin that comes in contact with it. Consequently, people don't eat it in its raw state. Even animals don't usually come near it. But the bulb and leaf can be cooked or roasted, and it makes them edible for people. And it was prevalent in Israel. So I guess like this, arum could be edible, but absolutely not in its present form. It needed to be cooked, and you needed to ascertain that it no longer contained any of these toxins or unpleasant components, which therefore place arum in company with other items that are either spiritually toxic or literally toxic and not available for consumption. And therefore, they are set aside. And if they are set aside, they are muksa, they cannot be carried even for the purpose of these mitzvahs, because the waiver to move these items on Shabbos, even though you should not be busy, moving around baskets of grain was l'tzorich mitzvah, and only the issue of tircha. But here we have another issue, the issue of muksa. Now, you would be not crazy to ask the next question. The follow-up question would be, well, okay, the Chazal didn't want us to be involved in tircha, but they allowed us to do a l'tzorich mitzvah. Why don't they also waive the prohibition of muksa l'tzorich mitzvah? That would be the next question. Dr. Hammer?
We give all this time to Palestinian in our room and Italian in our room, and no question about raw mustard. You know, whether it's Grey Poupon or whatever. What's the deal with raw mustard? Is it dangerous? Is it toxic?
First, we're going to ask our pharmacist. Tell us about raw mustard.
No. Mustard for human consumption, what we do with it, you boil it first. The seeds, the raw, is, I don't know if it's toxic, but it'll certainly give you a kick.
So
Alan.
raw mustard.
Alan, tell him about a mustard plaster.
Yeah, that I know. I thought about that.
Here, we have another problem. Arum loaf needs to be cooked. Mustard doesn't need to be cooked, but it has another need, says Rabbi Steinsaltz. No, it says the Art Scroll. Mustard is not eaten whole. We don't chomp on the seeds. It's pulverized. It's ground. You're not allowed to grind mustard on Shabbos. So if you have whole mustard seed on Shabbos that's uncooked or unground, well, you won't be able to eat it. You will not choose to eat it that way. And because people don't eat it whole and unprocessed, it too is muksa. And now we also understand mustard is a good item. People want to have mustard. So it's not like mustard is not a harvested item. It's reasonable that a person might have baskets of mustard in their storage place. And as you recall yesterday when I introduced this mission, I said once upon a time, people had their homes were multi-purpose. So their bedroom was the dining room, was the kitchen, was the living room, was the office, was the storage. And so it's quite reasonable that if you bought enough mustard for your famous steak rub that you sell in the market, well, you're going to have it in your home.
It has medicinal uses. People use mustard plaster for pain. Eat.
So now I want to address that one question, and then we're going to run through the Mishnah and jump into the Gemara, which will be equally engaging and will equally challenge us with Be'ezer Hashem, because we like to be challenged somewhat. So here is the question. Why didn't we waive muksa? Why didn't Chazal say, generally, something that is muksa on Erev Shabbos, something that is set aside, cannot be handled on Shabbos? But maybe they could have been so kind as to say, you know what, for a mitzvah, you can move muksa. And our Mishnah is clear that is not the case. The Ritva asks this. So here's a long story from the Ritva. Even a mitzvah deraisa cannot push off muksa. That's why on Shabbos, nowadays, you can't even do lulav and esrog or shofar. I'm trying to see the answer. Okay, the question is good. I don't understand the answer, so we'll have to keep our eyes peeled for a good answer. I don't know. All right. Question is good. I don't understand the answer. We'll have to look out for a good answer to this question. But again, going back to our point, you cannot move any of these items. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel has a different take. Matir beluf, he says you are allowed to handle this luf, mipnei shehu machal la'arvim, because it is food for ravens. It is food for ravens. And Rashi explains, going to Ashirim, Shemegadlin Arvim Legdula. The aristocracy, the fancy people in those days would raise ravens. They would breed them apparently, and it was something that they would do. It was a status symbol. And so here's the interesting thing. Everyone would probably agree that if you raise ravens, you would be allowed to handle the luf. Just most people don't raise ravens. Why is Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel the one to comment about ravens? Anyone want to try to take a stab at this? What's going on? Anyone? Anything about Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel's biography that makes him qualified or likely to make such a comment?
He's a rich guy who raised.
He was the Nasi.
He was a Nasi.
He was royalty.
He's rich, and he raised ravens.
He came from a rich family. They blended a great Talmud Chacham, but they were in the aristocratic circles with the people that today they would play polo. In those days, they were raising ravens. Maybe they played polo back then too. I don't know.
Maybe the ravens are like falcons; they can be trained.
That's what I imagine. That's what I envision. It must have been something in that ballpark. That's what I imagine. But I don't know. Let's see if we. So one thing we know is once Rashi says "Kegoyin Ashirim," we understand. Yeah, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel was likely talking, if not from his own experience, certainly when he went to the bank and he met one of his fellow Ashirim, they said, "Oh, we got these new ravens. Can we feed them on Shabbos? What's with the luf?" And so this was something that he would have been familiar with. He would have known about. I want to see if we get any more comments on this because this is interesting.
Is the raven a kosher bird?
Don't believe so.
Because I could figure out another use for them.
Oh, the Gemara is going to talk about this actually. Fascinating Gemara. We're going to see soon commented. But the shaila now, or Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, luf is not muksa because something that the royalty, the aristocracy would raise in Eretz Yisrael in this time, the end of the Second Temple era. That's what he says. Now the shaila, which we're going to discuss in the Gemara, is: was he giving a blanket license, or was he only giving a license to the folks that actually had these ravens? And that'll open up some fascinating discussions about how the Torah looks at every Jew as royalty, as aristocracy, regardless of their actual life circumstances. If you want to know a little bit more about the ravens, let's look here in the Meiri, 1 second. He actually gives us an overview here. You cannot move the luf around. You can only feed it to an oirev, which is an unkosher animal, which we'll discuss soon. You can't eat the seeds raw, you have to process them. And Shabbos you cannot prepare. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, matir beluf. Why does he allow luf? So I explained to you based on Rashi, because he was of royalty, of aristocracy, and he understood. And so he was saying for people that actually raise ravens, it's not muksa. But here, the Meiri quotes the Gemara, which we'll see soon. Every Jew, they're b'nei malachim, they're royalty. And royalty, umegadlim arvim derech sheshua, they would raise them as somewhat of a play thing, an entertainment type item. So I don't know if this is exactly like a falcon. And being that you raise it for your entertainment, you're obligated to feed them keshar behemtam, just like all other animals. But here the Meiri points out, in reality, the halacha is not like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Why? The reality is, most Jews are not raising ravens. Long story short, the Gemara discussed a little bit in the Poskim there's a little bit of a discussion. Should it be muksa or not? And that's the story. It's a little interesting cultural reference popped into our mission. Now let's close out our mission. Chavile kash. We didn't do this yesterday, so this is brand new material. Chavile kash, bundles of straw. The chavile eitzim and bundles of wood. The chavile zeradim and bundles of twigs. If he intends that they should be animal feed, you can move them around for clearing. But if a person did not, misaken, he didn't designate them for animal feed, you cannot use them on Shabbos. So just to give a fast recap, our Mishnah says like this. Generally speaking, Chazal do not want Jews busy schlepping stuff around on Shabbos. Maybe it's a tircha, that's what Rashi says. It's too much strenuous labor, not Shabbosdik. I'm sorry, it's strenuous labor, not appropriate on Shabbos. Don't do it, shouldn't be doing it. Some of the other Rishonim use another language, uvdin dechol. This is a mundane activity. So I guess in modern days, what we're saying is you should not be in your warehouse moving around pallets of stuff, nor may you have your workers do so. Even if there's not an essential malacha, suppose it's not muksa, or suppose it's not, you're not using machinery that are muksa, you still shouldn't do it because it's a tirchan Shabbos.
Rabbi, what animal eats wood?
What?
What animal eats wood?
Twigs?
Termites. Okay, it's for Amazon, other places which you are on. Okay, I know that. You can do Amazon in other countries as well.
So that's why I would translate this Gemara a little differently. I would translate this straw, twigs, and this would be Rashi, min konim. This is not.
Really eitzim. It's hard to maneuver around that.
No, twigs just means fine eitzim. Fine wood. Zeradim, Rashi says, are reeds, which are soft. I don't know why Rabbi Steinsaltz abandons Rashi here, and goes for twigs. I don't know. I'm sure he has a reason. But that's the fact of the matter. Let's see if he puts any comments in his Gemara. Hold on.
So Zadim, I will tell you that generally Zadim is translated as twigs.
So you're saying modern Ivrit,
Yeah, it would be
which not
translated as
explains
twigs.
Radim as Rashi does. So that would explain maybe why Rabbi Steinsaltz takes that translation. But I'm just saying that Rashi's interpretation makes it make a little more sense than. All right, we don't even have a lot of time to get into the Gemara, but we got to start. And here we're going to see, I believe this was Dr. Stamler's question. In other words, Hashta, help us understand these numbers. Chamesh mefanin, if you're allowed to remove even 5 boxes. Arba mivaye, is there a question? Do we need to mention 4? So if the number is 5, if that's a strict, rigid cutoff, that's the number. Well, then just use 5. And if the number is 4, just use 4. What's this, 4 or 5? That's like vague. That's unhelpful. Rav Chisda explains, no. Mishnah doesn't mean what you think it means. Excuse me. What it means is, Arba, Mei Chamesh. If you have 5 baskets, you can remove 4 of them, but you have to leave the 5th. You cannot entirely empty out all of the baskets. Arba, Mi Chamesh. And Chamesh, Ma'itzer Gadol. So if it is a small storehouse with only 5 baskets, leave 1 behind, take out 4. If it's a massive storehouse full of stuff, then the limit is 5. This is Rav Chisda's interpretation. Let's read Rashi. If in the space that you're looking at, you only had 5 kupais, don't remove more than 4. It's prohibited to entirely close out. It is prohibited to entirely empty the Isa. You know why? Alan, look very carefully. And now I know you looked ahead, but still. Dilma chazi gumais. Maybe you're going to notice holes, ditches, bekarka isa in the ground, umashvele, and you're gonna smooth it out. If you move out all your products, if you move out all your baskets, all of a sudden you're gonna see an empty floor, and your empty floor is gonna have ditches, and subconsciously you're gonna just smooth it out to make it safe. You don't want someone to fall in. There's liability. There's hazards.
So if you move 4 out of 5, you're not gonna notice holes. But if you move the 5th, you're gonna notice holes all of a sudden.
So let's game this out because I have your question too.
It's very funny.
Hold on, let's game this out because I had this question too. When your job is done, you survey. Here's what I'm thinking. When the job is done, that's when you survey the room to do repair and then to reuse it. When you still have another box, it's not just that there's one box remaining. It's that psychologically this still remains a storage house more than anything else. And so maybe psychologically, if I'm using the right word, it's less likely that you're going to do all the prep.
Rabbi,
Yes.
it's a good thing we're not in person because I think for this question you would take a swing at me.
Why?
Maybe when he sees the hole, he has a machshava that he's going to fill it.
What's wrong with the machshava?
That's the problem. It's like doing the work. If you take that one standard.
Or that there'll be cockroaches there and you're going to have to stamp on them and kill the cockroaches.
No, if the machshava works positively, it should work negatively too.
Machshava works to activate machshava related items.
So
Machshava does not work to activate Maisa related items. What's an instance of a machshava related item? Something that gets designated for a specific use with machshava. Machshava is effective because there it's all about your intention. Intention is real for intention related issues. Intention does not work yet to move items. By the way, I saw a headline, which I didn't read, that psychedelics.
no, but if his intention is I'm going to fill it on Shabbos.
No.
Psychedelics.
The correlation between psychedelics and telepathy. I didn't read the article. But it looked like an exciting headline. What's my point? I don't know. We're talking about the power of machshava.
Somebody's just put on the computer that he went to a fortune teller. He knocked on the door, and she said, "Who's there?" So he went home.
Aybazoi. So again, no, Rebbe, you're asking a good question, but my answer, but the answer is a good answer. Machshava works for machshava when the main issue is machshava. Machshava does not work when Maisa is the main thing. So your storehouse will not be emptied by an intention to empty it. It'll be emptied by an action of emptying it. Rebbe Nachum's question, however, respectfully, is an even better question. It's a good question. We have to understand why, and the Gemara is gonna just use this language itself. So Rashi's really giving us a preview. But when we get there, we'll want to understand why leaving just one item would not cause you to smooth out the gumais in that area. Or let's say it's a massive oitzer with 150 baskets. Well, the little area you cleared out, that's clear. Why are we not afraid that you're not going to smooth it out? Unless the explanation is that the fact that you leave one basket because it's Shabbos will remind you that there are many limitations to what you're allowed to do in this oitzer. And so perhaps the restriction is the reminder. That's probably the real answer.
Rabbi, you have another problem when you start to use phrases like small and large. What's small for one person is large for another.
Well, it's not a problem
it's a loosey-goosey phrase.
It's not a problem when the Gemara itself provides the definition.
Rabbi, when you just walk anywhere and you on Shabbos and you see a hole, you have the wherewithal to know that you're not going to fill it.
True.
So I think psychologically, it's already within us on Shabbos, if we're aware of things we're not allowed to do, that we wouldn't do it whether we see something or not, because in the open space, we wouldn't fill it a hole either.
True. So you're saying human beings are not so impulsive that we can't constrain ourselves from covering up a hole on Shabbos.
Because especially since we're ingrained not to.
But here's the question. There's also a subconscious.
I understand your point, Bo. Your point is well taken, that psychologically, once you start removing automatically, you'd smooth it off with your foot or something like that.
Yeah, but I'm saying, yeah. And therefore, by leaving one basket,
I accept that.
Yeah, I mean, again, I had the same question. I'm sure the Gemara is going to discuss that. It's been a while since I learned this Gemara, but that was like, I'm trying to think along the lines of the Gemara. That's probably how the Gemara understands it. Dr. Hammer?
You're thinking like a plebeian. You suggested 5 minutes ago that there are different thoughts and perhaps regulations depending on your financial situation. So
In the realm of Muksa.
about the Ravens, we're talking about, we're not talking about Edgar Allan Poe, quote, the Raven nevermore. We're talking about the idea that maybe if you're a rich person, so there's a hole there. So no, after Shabbos or whenever, you'll ask your servant to take care of it. The thought won't enter your mind that you have any responsibility for stuff like that. So what I'm asking is, how often does this happen when we have to look at a Gemara and say, okay, who wrote it? What's his background? And is it really skewed that it was really appropriate for the wealthy, but the 95% who didn't fit into that category, it would have not made any sense for them, but they had to follow it.
It's a very
But it also goes to my question.
Hold on, doctor, you're asking a very good question. And
I just wanted to say that same question for me is small and large storeroom. It's also a question of how rich a person is. Wouldn't it be, Bernie?
A little different. Mine is a broader.
Dr. Hammer is asking a good question. I want to, generally speaking, the Chazal give a blanket psak that crosses all societal, people of all kinds of means and backgrounds. We don't look that much into the socioeconomic conditions of a person. It's not like there's a Shulchan Aruch for well-to-do people and a Shulchan Aruch for needy people. Generally speaking, the Chazal give there are certain areas where, for example, the matter of muksa, which is a somewhat more subjective matter. Are you going to put it to use? So over there, Rabban Shimon Gamliel gave a comment to remove something out of the category of muksa. So he was being makil. Who was he being makil for? I said maybe he was only being makil for the rich people, but in reality, he was making a broader case. He was saying that I view every Jew as royalty, regardless of their socioeconomic status. And therefore, I want to open up and make luf available and non-muksa for every Jew, because really every Jew, a chicken in every pot and a raven in everyone's cage. That's what he was saying. He was making in an interesting way, he was making a comment about how he looks at the order. Whereas
someone has to mute.
Doctor, I hit mute, but whereas our case here, we're giving general rules. A small oitzar is like 5 baskets. That's the average kind of thing. And so therefore you can move forward, but you have to leave one, which is a reminder. You keep the format. You remind yourself that it's still an oitzar and you're not closing out. Large and small, there's many reasons why a person can have, but I want to answer really, Dr. Hammer. I think your main question was, is there a distinction between a rich person and a poor person? And the answer is, we're talking to the person that's moving the stuff. So whether you're rich or poor, if you're the guy that's doing the labor and moving the items on Shabbos, you need an extra reminder to not do the thing that you would do almost subconsciously. So of course, we aren't so impulsive that we can't control ourselves, but the Mishnah understands the nature of when a person gets absorbed in a certain task. Sometimes we forget about time and space and we don't know where we are. We're just doing our thing. And our body is trained. Our bodies become trained to do certain motions and certain activities, especially something we do very frequently. And so that's what's going on over here, I believe. We're reminding ourselves to not get into that zone. And that's my thoughts.
Rabbi.
Hold on, Dr. Hammer.
The reason I could see that issue being a real issue, and in a way, if you call it a psychological issue, is because what you said is not totally true, in that we have a group of people called Kohanim and a group of people called Levium. And there are people who are not part of those special groups that receive special payouts from others, who might say, you know what? They have their group. I wasn't born into it. What can I do to become a Kohen or a Levi? You can't do anything, okay? but I could become part of another group. We'll call it the rich group, and then try to get something for people in that group, which by nature perhaps might not sound right, but it doesn't sound right that these people who were born in these groups get what they get. So,
right. So I want to clarify something. Our Mishnah is not, and I realize that the Mishnah leads to this impression. The Mishnah, and then we're going to end because we're a little bit over time.
Right.
The Mishnah here is not talking to a Kohen or a Levi or Yisrael. The Mishnah is talking to every Jew that has an Eitzah.
right.
The likelihood of complexity is more likely to arise by items that are borderline sanctified but not fully sanctified. So the more regulation is truma and meiser or unprepped items, and so that's where it comes in. But the essential question of our Mishnah, which is, can you move baskets to clear a space for guests, or can you move baskets to clear space for a shear? That's a universal comment to any Jew who's Shabbos observant, regardless of the reason why or how they happen to have baskets. You could be very impoverished and hosting your friends' baskets. You could be very wealthy and bought a closeout of 700 extra bushels of luf because you thought it was the yummy spam that you feed in the army, and you found out that it was this toxic legume or something. But whatever the circumstances, the halachas are being conveyed universally, except some of the complicating issues can revolve around truma, meiser, and sanctified foods.
Rabbi,
I hope that clarifies my
Rabbi,
understanding of the Mishnah. Yes, Rebbe.
we had socioeconomic considerations throughout. We had the piece of cloth on Shabbos, which is useless, and then somebody says a poor person would use it. It's there throughout.
Yes. So yeah, the Gemara halacha, Jewish law is not blind to the reality that there are different people in different socioeconomic circumstances, and sometimes it's relevant. It's usually not relevant to the detriment of the people of low socioeconomic conditions. It takes into account the reality, but the halacha is universal. But part of the halacha universal is there are certain scenarios that take your machshava, take your frame of mind into account. Rebel, actually, it's the same point. When frame of mind is relevant, we'll take that into account to some extent. But when it's the cold, dry halacha, that's across the board. So sometimes the halacha says, consider how the person feels about the item. For example, muksa. You have an item that can be used for many things. Did you specifically intend to use it for a prohibited item? Well, then maybe it's muksa. Did you specifically intend to use it for something permissible? Well, then it's permissible. Did you specifically? So wherever halacha considers your intention or your machshava, then different people have different machshavas. But it doesn't mean that the halacha is highly, what's the word? Highly targeted. But you know what? I suppose we could probably put together a very interesting work about all the times in Jewish law where there is a distinction between classes. One other thing actually comes to mind that's biblical, which is that by Bikurim, and then we'll close out Bikurim, which are the first fruits that are presented in the Beis Hamikdash Shilakayin. So it says like this: the essential mitzvah is to bring the fruits. The Mishnah describes how wealthy people had these beautiful golden baskets, and they would get to take them back. The impoverished people would hand weave baskets, and those baskets, when they would give, were held on to by the Beis Hamikdash. And so on one hand, this is a typical scenario where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, because the wealthy get to hold on to their golden baskets and the poor people don't even get to hold on to their handmade baskets. But really, the intention over there, if I recall correctly, of the Mishnah is the reverse. Hashem sees the handmade, impoverished baskets made by those that were poverty-stricken with a lot more endearment, and so Hashem Kaviyachol wants to hold on to them. And so it's sending a message that Hashem values your smaller, handmade contribution that's full of love and devotion much more than the fancy schmancy rich people. The rich people can have their baskets back. We don't need it. But the simple but item that comes from the heart, to Hashem, that's very, 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 very dear.
It's the old
So-
Cain and Hevel story.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, anyways, those are my thoughts. Alan, you'll let us know if the art scroll agrees or disagrees. I hope I got it right, but we all make mistakes, myself
I'll
included.
keep reading.
And I want to thank everyone for joining us on a journey through a new chapter in the Gemara, chapter Chai. I didn't anticipate such a rich conversation on the first few lines of the
You're
Gemara.
supposed to, if you pardon the pun, when you use the word rich.
Be'ezer Hashem, tomorrow we will resume, and wishing and hoping for everyone's good health and good circumstances. And looking
Shikoch, have
forward
a great day.
our journey through the Talmud. Stand by for today's Chumash.
Stay cool.